So this video is going to give you a quick overview of how we use Google Classroom to manage our teacher evaluation data and information. So first thing you need to know is just to make sure that you are logged into your camas.wednet.edu Google account. Then you can just go up here and type classroom.google.com, and that will take you to the Classroom app. Chances are you're only going to have one classroom that you've been added to thus far. My evaluator, Jeff Snell, has added me to this classroom, and this is where my evaluation is housed. So you can click on your classroom and you'll look for an assignment that has self-assessment or teacher's self-assessment somewhere in the title. So when you click on that assignment, you're going to see quite a few things on mine, but yours is probably only going to have a Google Sheets related to teacher self-assessment evaluation. So we'll talk about what these other things are and why I have late unsubmitted over here in just a minute. But when you click on yours, it's going to open up a spreadsheet that looks just like this. And you'll see a bunch of different tabs down here that you could click through. The first one to pay attention to is that one that's instructions. And this is a good overview tab to help you understand how this whole thing is organized. And I encourage you to scroll down and take a look at it when you first get in, because there's some very clear visuals as to how this is all laid out. Yours will, of course, have the correct year. The main tab for you to pay attention to early in the school year is this one down here that says self-assessment, because this is the task that you'll need to complete within the first 6 weeks. So when you click on that, you're going to see the spreadsheet identifies criterion and components, and this is based on our evaluation framework. So hopefully from previous videos, you remember that we have a total of 8 state criteria, and then underneath each of those, we have a few components, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But your task in the first 6 weeks is to fill out this first column that is the fall self-rating. And since you're new to this district, you're likely not familiar with our evaluation framework. There are some things built into this to help support your understanding. So if you see all those little black triangles in the corners of boxes, those are pop-outs. So any of them, like this one right here, it pops out and says, oh, teachers complete prior to initial meeting with evaluator. So these little pieces of information that support you to help you with your understanding. So the ones that are related to the 1.1, 1.2, and so on, if we hover over that, it gives you the language of proficiency from our evaluation rubric. And that's a first place when you start to think about doing your own self-rating. So you can rate yourself U for unsatisfactory, B for basic, P for proficient, or D for distinguished. But it's really important that you're not just operating on the subjective feels about, oh, I think I'm good at that, and I'll give myself a distinguished. Because the reality is this is an evidence-based evaluation system that is connected to that rubric language. So it's important that you start to get familiar with that language. So if we look at this first one, providing clear learning goals and scales, and I look at the language for proficiency, the teacher provides a clearly stated learning target daily and/or learning goal longer term, and so on. So take a moment and read that. And then I think to myself, does this statement represent what consistently occurs in my practice? Not something that happens sporadically or when I think of it, but this is a consistent part of how I operate in my classroom or in my context. And on top of that, is this something that I'm really paying attention to and monitoring? I can notice the impact of the decisions that I'm making and be able to kind of reflect in the moment and adjust. If I feel like that's an ongoing, consistent part of my practice, I can give myself a P for proficient. That's pretty straightforward. Let's say we look at this next one, celebrating success. And I think to myself, in my English classes, I don't like doing class parties and stuff like that and making a big deal out of stuff. So maybe I'm not so good at celebrating success. I can't just make that assumption. So I should look at the language of proficiency. And if I read that and I'm still not sure, there's another thing that's popped up over here. And this can help me even better understand what celebrating success means. So if I click on that link, it opens the actual framework language with some more detail. So talks about some possible teacher evidence that someone might see, talks about some possible student evidence. It articulates everything from unsatisfactory to distinguished. And I can use all this to better understand where I should rate myself. And when I look at those things, I feel like I do celebrate student success sometimes, but I'm kind of inconsistent and I don't really think too much about it. So maybe that's an area that's basic that I could grow in. So you do that same process to try to understand the framework and understand the language and also give yourself an honest self-assessment. So you keep moving down, identifying those things that are based on the content of the rubric. What you also need to know is at this stage of your employment and your experience with our framework, it's likely that there are things that you just don't understand very well yet, and that's okay. So it might be that you read interacting with new knowledge and think, oh, I match this information for proficiency, so I'm going to give myself a proficient. And then as you continue learning, by the mid-year check, when you self-assess again, maybe you understand that framework a little bit better and you realize, yeah, you know what? I actually am basic. And that's okay. Basics actually are not something that you should be afraid of. I know we and educators, we all always want to do our very best, but the reality is there's a lot of complex work that goes into teaching. And there are always places where we can improve. And it's important, especially for those of you who are in the first 5 years of your career. Developmentally, the law actually expects early service teachers to have a lot of basics, and that's okay. It doesn't actually adversely affect your continued employment. So as you are doing these self-ratings, it's really about making sure that you are looking at the rubric language, being honest with yourself, and thinking about what really are the patterns within your practice. So that self-assessment is the first step. All these other columns we'll talk about later over the course of the year. So I want to go back to Google Classroom. So when we look at this is where we began and found that spreadsheet. Mine says late unsubmitted, and then I have these other things over here. A common issue that people run into is you'll go into your spreadsheet, you'll do what you need to do, you'll come back here and you'll turn it in. So it's asking me if I want to turn in this work. So I submit it to my evaluator. It's now turned in. And then I think, oh, I forgot to do one part. I forgot to do criteria 8. I go back and click on it. And this one's going to show my actual one from this year. It now says view only over here. I can't actually make any changes. So if I were to go into my self-assessment and try to do some work, I just have frustration and nothing else. So that's why you can unsubmit, then go back in and make some changes, and then turn in. So just be aware of that. If you end up going into this document and you aren't able to make any edits, you might need to unsubmit it and then resubmit it. And that's one of the most common issues that we've seen with this. The other files that you see here, this thing that says NT growth scales and so on and so forth, these are pieces of evidence that I voluntarily decided to add to my evaluation. And these were things that I thought, oh, this will help my boss get a better picture of what it is I do in my work. And so you're not required to submit X number of artifacts, but if it's already exists and it's easy to just add and it helps give a clearer picture, might as well. So it's as simple as going here to add. You can add a Google Drive file, you can add a link, you can do whatever you need to do. And that can help amass some materials that can support your evaluation. As always, consider me the point person related to anything related to your evaluation. My email is right up here. I'm more than happy to come to your site to support you with this, with technical issues. You can send me an email if you have questions. And really the goal of this whole system is about really us understanding our practice and thinking about how we want to improve. And this is just one of many tools that we have in place to accomplish that.